Right, okay, everybody, I think we will start the webinar. People may join us as we go on, and I'm sure there'll be lots of you watching this on our YouTube channel. So yeah, hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We'll be discussing moving to and buying property in Spain. So my name is Matt Penfold, advisor and director here at Fiduciary Wealth. Personally, I've been in financial services for 20 years. I relocated out, as many of you have or will be doing, 4 years ago, based in our Gibraltar office, but I actually live across the border in Spain. As a company, we're a wealth management company serving expats, mainly in the UK, Gibraltar, Portugal, and of course, Spain. We're able to provide tax-led wealth management and relocation advice, and the aim is to make your life and transition to your new country in residence as Spain as smooth and as easy as possible for you. And today I'm very pleased to say we have Darren Windhager from Inspired Homes in Marbella. Darren, if my pronunciation of that wasn't great, you can correct me later. Darren, we'll introduce you a little bit more later, but for now we're getting to the webinar. So we're talking about planning to move to Spain, but there's some content that will be appropriate for those already living in Spain. Maybe you've been here a short amount of time. Maybe you're renting and you're looking at the property market, which Darren can help with. So we'll cover quite a few topics today. What I will say is on the visas and the tax, I will cover a small amount of that today, but we have Darren's presence, so it would be wasteful to not take advantage of that. We have run similar webinars, just more focused on the visas and the tax, so feel free to visit our YouTube channel and have a look at those, and they will have a bit more detailed content for you. For those watching today, we politely ask if you can share, like, and subscribe to our YouTube, and there'll be a lot more content on there that you can enjoy. So in part one, we're talking about planning to move to Spain. So what do you need to consider? So the landscape has changed, especially for Brits post-Brexit. I was one of the fortunate ones. I was able to relocate before that. I know it was the case for Darren as well, and it was a little bit more simpler there in the sense of we had the right to residency via the EU. Not the case anymore, but it doesn't mean that the door is closed. But regardless of if you need a visa or not, I think our main advice is that you need to make sure that you plan in advance. It is nice to get carried away with the idea of beautiful Spain and to enjoy those beaches and the sunshine, and we want to, jump on a plane, move across and start the new life. But the taxation, especially in Spain, is very different to what we're used to in the UK, and there are certain situations that and I give a practical example here. You have a pension in the UK, and we're encouraged to build that up, and we gain tax relief to build that up. And when we come to access that, 25% of it is tax-free in the UK. Now in Spain, they don't recognise that tax-free element of it. So these are the things that, if you are in a position, you should look at that possibly before you move to Spain. And there's a lot of other situations like this where if you plan in advance, put a plan in advance, work with people who know what they're talking about, because we see a lot of information now on Google. I see a lot on things like Facebook groups, and there's some good information on there, and there's some very poor information that really could kind of trip people up. So my colleague Paul always says, people can be penny wise, but you end up being pound foolish. And what we mean by that is if you don't take professional advice, you don't follow the right steps, there could be mistakes for you further down the line. Another kind of key consideration is inheritance tax. Now in Spain, and I will cover this maybe in a little bit more detail later. In Spain, they have succession tax, which varies greatly depending on the region of Spain that you live in, whereas and that's based on where you are resident. In the UK, inheritance tax is based on the concept of domicile, and your domicile is something that you acquire at birth, generally based on where you were born and where your parents were born. And many people think that you relocate to Spain or elsewhere and you immediately shed your exposure to UK inheritance tax. That's not the case at all. It is possible to lose your domicile, but you have to be outside of the UK for many years, and you really need to cut off all ties with the UK. So the bad news is if you move to Spain, that you're still potentially exposed to UK inheritance tax. The good news is there's legitimate planning opportunities that you can take advantage of that can limit or even completely remove your exposure to UK inheritance tax. So if you have a reasonable size estate and you are living in Spain or considered moving to Spain, then that's really a conversation that we should have with you one-to-one. And then the second part is exiting the UK, and it all comes together as part of the planning process, and we always advise that everyone exits the UK properly, and by that we mean informing HMRC that you are no longer UK tax residents. That works well because then if you have pensions, say the state pension, is potentially you can get that paid gross, and therefore you only pay your taxation in Spain where you're obliged to do so because you are a tax resident. But also you need to be mindful of the number of days you spend in the UK, because we all relocate to Spain or other countries, but we tend to spend time back in the UK visiting family, or there may be work commitments or something else. And the UK has introduced, they did introduce something called the UK statutory test. Now this assesses the number of days that you can spend in the UK as a leaver without re-triggering tax residency. So that's something very careful and bear in mind, because you're becoming a Spanish tax resident, but it is possible to re-trigger UK tax residency. So again, something that we can advise on, and important to take that into account. So I'll move on to part two. And like I said, I want to cover this section relatively briefly because we've covered this elsewhere, and we don't want to repeat ourselves too much, but I cover briefly the visas. And again, this is for Brits post-Brexit that we now require a visa unless you are one of those people who has access to an EU passport. So if you have an EU passport, maybe you have Irish family and you've been able to gain one, then you retain that freedom of movement to work and live in Europe. If not, to live in Spain now, we need to gain a visa. So there are a few options, which I will cover very briefly. There's the golden visa. Now, the golden visa requires you to make an investment in Spain. Normally, this is via real estate, which is the minimum purchase of €500,000. Very suitable for those who want access to the Schengen area, maybe want to work their way towards a European passport. But there's a few complications in that, but the first step is you need to make that investment in property. The second is the non-lucrative visa. This is generally aimed at those generally aimed at retirees, but it's for those who have passive income. So by passive income, we mean pensions, maybe rental income from UK property, or dividends from non-executive positions are very similar. And the purpose of what the non-lucrative visa is you need to effectively prove to the Spanish government that you won't be a burden on the state. So you've got enough funds that you can sustain your lifestyle. So the amount that you need to demonstrate is just under €28,000. That increases if you're bringing family members with your spouse or dependent children. Again, there's other requirements for the non-lucrative visa, which we can cover elsewhere. There are other visas. There's an entrepreneur's visa. That's for people starting up a business. That's generally aimed at people looking at kind of high tech, tech-driven businesses that forward thinking that they want to attract to the country. There's the professional visa. This is if you are sponsored by an employer, which is difficult these days because, again, they need to demonstrate that the skills that you bring to Spain, they can't obtain elsewhere in Europe. There has been talk of a digital nomad visa. And if you look online, it suggests that they're progressing with that. But this is Spain, it's bureaucracy, things move slow, and I wouldn't rely on that happening in the next year or so. Time will tell, and I know other countries, Portugal and I think Greece are looking at this, and I think post-COVID, a lot of people are in a position where they can work remotely. Whether or not Spain identifies that and wants to push through this visa, time will tell. But at the moment, really, the main ones to look at is your golden visa and your non-lucrative visa, especially for those no longer working. One thing to add on that is the non-lucrative visa doesn't allow you to work in anymore. So it is for those generally retired who have passive income. If you want to come and work in Spain, then the golden visa is your best route unless you can get sponsored. So as part of this section, we'll cover taxation very briefly again. Taxation in Spain, there are similarities to the UK in the sense that income is taxed on progressive tax rate. So the more you earn, the greater the tax rate you pay. Now, tax in Spain is the rates that you pay are a combination of the regional tax rates and the state tax rate. So they do vary depending on where you're based in Spain. Rental income from the UK property, we get that asked a lot. That is one of the few taxes that you continue to pay in Spain. So you become a Spanish tax resident, you're living in Spain for over 183 days, which is effectively the cutoff. You pay your tax in Spain. You need to declare your worldwide income in Spain. But for rental income from UK properties, you do continue to pay that in the UK. You do need to declare that income in Spain, but you receive a tax credit because there's a double taxation agreement between Spain and the UK. There is a personal allowance, but it's much less in Spain. It's around €5,500 in Andalusia, for example. We compare that to it's around £12.5 in the UK. So it's a lot lower here in Spain. The personal allowance does increase slightly as you reach age 65 and above. And another thing to bear in mind is wealth tax. Now, wealth tax is a kind of contentious issue in Spain. And it's developed over the last couple of weeks. And the way it's being dealt with maybe kind of tells you about bureaucracy in Spain a little bit. So wealth tax has always been decided by the regional governments. So in Andalusia, we had wealth tax, and so 3 or 4 weeks ago, so early October, the regional government here, which is one of the more right-wing parties, they decided they're going to scrap wealth tax. They decided the amount that it actually brings in taxation is outweighed by the cost in collecting this, but also it puts off a lot of individuals. People aren't used to wealth tax and it's off-putting. So that was scrapped. Great news. 2 weeks later, the state government, who are more left-leaning, they've introduced a second wealth tax, which is now decided by them. The regional governments have no control about it. And so they will be reintroducing wealth tax. Now, it hasn't been formalised in the government yet. It's statements they're making, and time will tell if they can get that through their version of the Parliament, and we will see. But wealth tax is something that comes as a shocker, and again, based on your region, based on the amount of assets you hold, where your assets are held, this is something that we probably need to have a one-to-one discussion with you. And there are still taxes, just like we have in the UK, on capital gains, dividends, interest. One thing to bear in mind is that during your life in the UK, you may have accumulated tax-friendly wrappers. ISAs is a big one that people have. Now, bear in mind that as soon as you leave the UK, those wrappers no longer work for you. So Spain doesn't recognise the ISA wrapper, so any investments you have within the ISA will be taxed. Which leads us kind of nicely onto tax planning opportunities. And again, I won't cover this in more detail, but taxing in Spain can be rather aggressive, but it does open up opportunities for expats living in Spain. Now, you can't use an ISA, but there is the closest equivalent in Spain is something called the Spanish compliant investment bond. And any investments within the bonds, there's no immediate capital gains on those. You only pay tax on withdrawals when you make a withdrawal, and only on the gain element of it. So it's tax deferred rather than tax free, but it's a very good vehicle for if you want to build up your investments in Spain. There's also a QROPS, Qualifying Recognised Overseas Pension Scheme. That is a way of transferring your UK pension out of the UK, and there's many benefits to doing that. Again, we've covered these in detail before, so either have a look at one of our old webinars, or reach out to us, and we can have a conversation and send you some details. But a QROPS, if you are relocating from the UK, then you should be considering a QROPS and understand how that can benefit you. You could also take advantage of an international SIP, and it's important to have a conversation to see which is the most suitable for your particular circumstances. And the final one is something called a QNUP, so a Qualifying Non-UK Pension Scheme. So this is a pension scheme, but it is funded from a lump sum, and there are many benefits to this. A key one is that if you relocate out of the UK and you have exposure to UK inheritance tax, which I mentioned briefly earlier, if you invest in a QNUPS, then the money that's placed in there is immediately outside of your estate for UK inheritance tax, even if you return to the UK. So it's a very good planning tool. It has to be set up correctly. So and it has to be a legitimate pension scheme. So if you're, to use an example, at age 75, you've got net assets of £2 million, and then you come and say, right, I want to put 1.5 million of my money in this QNUPS, so I don't pay inheritance tax in the UK. That doesn't work. It's not a legitimate pension scheme. You are purely doing that to avoid UK inheritance tax. So again, we go back to what I was saying at the start. This is where the importance of planning comes into play, because schemes like this, which can be really beneficial, the earlier you use them, the better. I won't go into too much more detail about the QNUPS, but we are running a webinar purely focused on that this afternoon, actually. So tune in if you're interested in that, or again, research that. So there's a lot of opportunities out there for you, but again, it's you need to take the right advice and make sure you know what you're doing. So I'll move on to part 3, and maybe the reason why a lot of people are watching this, and we have Darren with us, who's going to talk to us about the Spanish property market and how they may be able to help you. So Darren, great to have you today. Can you just introduce yourself and your company for us, please?
Yes, thank you for having me, Matt. My name's Darren Windigower, and I'm the founder of Inspired Homes Marbella. The company was formed 7 years ago, but all the employees have probably 20 to 24 years of experience, i.e. we've all lived in Spain that amount of time. We are a bespoke company, we're only 4 people, and we specialize from Marbella down to Sotogrande. That's our area of expertise. We also have a YouTube channel with many of our listings there. So that would be a good idea for people, potential clients, to look at to see the type of properties we offer. We are very strong in the 500,000 to 1.5 million range. That is our speciality. So, yeah, thank you for having me on, Matt.
Perfect, thank you, Dan. That's great. And what we'll do at the end of the webinar, we'll provide our contact details and that for Darren as well. And anyone who wants to reach out, please do that. So, Darren, just can you tell us a little bit about the Spanish property market? And like you say, you specialise in southern Spain. So, what is it like? What sort of properties are we looking at? Is there any difference to the UK market?
The only difference, the main difference here is there are no chains. So either everybody's a cash buyer or they take financing, but there's never a chain involved. So we set a completion date and we generally stick to that date. So that's an important factor. The market immediately after COVID did dip about 10%. But since then, it's been on a tear, really, in line with other European markets. So we're probably now 5% above the pre-COVID level in terms of prices. Property has stabilised in the last 4 or 5 weeks with interest rates rising. So I think we've seen the gains stopping now, and it seems to be a much more balanced market. We do still have a shortage of quality stock, though, and that is where the demand is at the moment from the Northern Europeans. High quality penthouses, villas, with the latest technology, certificate A or B. So there is a shortage of that, but there is a little bit more stock coming on the market. The banks are still open for financing at the moment, contrary to popular belief. You can borrow about 4% at the moment, fixed, or you can borrow about 1.5% over Euribor, which this morning was 2.6%. So very, very similar funding rates at the moment. And the banks are open for business, which is great news.
Great, perfect. And for Brits who are watching this, so I mentioned about the golden visa. So the types of property you sell, they're suitable for that?
Yeah, yes, in general, most of our stock is over €500,000, which, as you alluded to, you need to have €500,000 of equity in a property. So if you have a property for €1 million, as long as you have €500,000 equity in the property, then that qualifies for the scheme.
Perfect. And one thing I would add to that, actually, and I think we may have spoke about this before, but it's a kind of common mistake that people make is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Darren, but if you have a couple buying a property and say they're buying a property for $500,000, if they buy that in joint names, then effectively it's only $250,000 each and wouldn't qualify for the visa. They can't combine that. So if you are buying a property for the purpose of gaining the golden visa and it's for less than $1 million, they should buy that in sole names. Is that fair to say? Yeah,
that's correct as well. But also the $500,000 can be made up of multiple properties as well. So you could buy 3 investment properties, for argument's sake. As long as you have $500,000 in equity in the properties, then you will qualify.
Okay, perfect. So they can buy a home and then maybe a couple of properties and they can rent those out. That's perfectly acceptable, yeah?
Absolutely. So we've seen clients buying a main home for 400,000, like an apartment, and then a 200,000 investment property that sits alongside it. So with the total equity, then either one of the partners becomes a sole owner and the other one automatically gets residency by virtue of being a partner or married.
Perfect. And yeah, that's correct. So the visa and how it works, for those back to the visa, if you've got a couple, then the person who has the property, they can get the visa, but your spouse can get residency off the back of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
One spouse with a property and leaving the other behind, that would be rather cool, I think. But and the types of property that we see in Spain, does this Because I know in Spain, you know, there's more flats and apartments, maybe compared to what we're used to in Spain. Is that the case with the sort of properties you're dealing with, or does it vary?
Well, obviously it varies, but there has been a progression towards larger properties now. So many of the developers have moved away from the 2-bed, 2-bath model and are building 3-bedroom properties. And Taylor Wimpey almost exclusively only build 3-bedroom properties now because they've recognised the demand for extra space. So yeah, but in general, we sell villas, apartments, townhouses, but people are requiring a little bit more space at the moment. I think that's the underlying trend.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I guess presumably it just depends where you want to be based. If you want to be on the marina, sorry, apologies for that. I think my Zoom cut out. I'll make sure our IT guys cut this out for the recording. So for those who are watching it, it will be a seamless. But I'm not quite sure the beauty of technology these days, I guess. So Darren, one last question: what key tips would you give to anyone looking at buying property in Spain?
Well, I think I have 2 main points. One, I think you've covered. If you're seriously thinking of relocating to Spain, it's important that you take tax planning and get your ducks in a row. The second, which is often overlooked, is if you are taking finance, to obtain an approval in principle before coming to Spain. So we work with 2 or 3 mortgage brokers, and if you provide them with the paperwork, they can get you a pre-approved mortgage. Now, that approval will last for, say, 3 or 4 months, but it means if you find the right property whilst you're here and touring, you can effectively pull the trigger and go ahead. So we see lots of clients find a lovely property, but they don't have their finances in order. And by the time they sort that out, the property's gone, and then we're back to square one. So we are encouraging all our clients who need finance to speak to brokers before they come to Spain. Again, that's something we can help with, but it is important. To secure your financing. That's probably the most important point, apart from sorting out the tax details that you alluded to earlier.
Yeah, and I guess interest rates are still going up, so I think if you can secure, I think it's at around 4% at the moment. Okay, it's not what we had 9 months ago, but it's still not too bad if these are going up. So perfect, wonderful, Darren. That's great. We've got a few frequently asked questions that we've been sent through before the webinar. I do have one for you, Darren, so you're not escaping just yet. But these ones are quite simple. A couple for me. We get this asked quite a lot. Can I move to Spain but elect to pay my taxes in the UK? I mean, there's a very simple answer to that. No. If you're living in Spain, again, we covered this earlier, over 183 days, then your tax obligations are in Spain. There may be certain situations where you pay tax elsewhere, but you would still need to declare your income in Spain, and provided there's a double taxation agreement, then there will be a tax credit for that. And the second one we get asked about is for those retiring, their UK state pension, how is this taxed and treated? So again, if you exit the UK cleanly, you should be able to do that, and you're able to have your state pension paid gross, which again is added to your total income in Spain. The beauty is, as part of the double taxation agreement between Spain and the UK, you can continue to receive your state pension in Spain, and it continues to increase in value via the triple lock. Well, if they're introducing or reintroducing it after they pause that. There are some countries where the UK, they don't have that agreement, and therefore your pension will be paid at a certain level and it doesn't increase in retirement, which means that effectively devalues. That's not the case if you're living in Spain. And then the last one for you, Darren, so taxes on property purchases. So if someone's buying a property in Spain, what sort of taxes might they face?
Right, yeah, good question. Fortunately, after COVID, taxes were lowered to encourage investment, but recently they've kept the lower rates in place for the foreseeable future. So buying a resale property now will cost you 9%. That includes stamp duty, lawyers' fees, and notary fees. And a new development will cost about 13.5%, again, including all of the fees. So there is a difference between resale and new development, but obviously the new developments come with guarantees, 10 years on the property and 2 years on all the appliances, underfloor heating, air conditioning, etc., etc. But it is worth bearing in mind because it's a lot more expensive than buying in the UK, for argument's sake. So that needs to be borne in mind.
Exactly, and again, I know we probably sound like a broken record, but if people are planning in advance, that may come as a bit of a shock compared to maybe the lower stamp duty we're used to in the UK. So if people are planning in advance, I would speak to ourselves, or on the property side, speak to Darren before you relocate. So the final section that we always cover is what one piece of advice we would give to anyone looking to move to Spain. But I think both Darren and I have really given the same answer, and it's to plan, take proper advice, and know what you're doing. Because I don't know about you, Darren, but I've seen so many instances where people have contacted us and say, right, I'm in Spain or Portugal or wherever it is now, what do I need to do? And you say, well, you know, we can help you, we can do things now, that's not a problem, but you haven't planned in advance. And I'm sure it's the same with you, Darren. You come across people and you know, they're just so excited about buying the property. Like you say, they don't have their mortgage finance in place, they haven't considered the stamp duty. So one piece of advice would be that: plan, take professional advice from our side, from the wealth management side of it, and the taxers. We'd go back to something I covered briefly at the start, is UK inheritance tax. It's a hurdle and something that people kind of trip up on quite often, and not only those who move to Spain and maybe can't shake off their domicile, but we often see people who move across here and they think, right, that's my life forever. I think that's the intention for most people, but things change. You know, you have a common one is maybe family, grandchildren. People want to move back to spend time with them. If people have kind of health problems, they may kind of trust the NHS a little bit more. Or if they want to kind of seek care in the UK. So again, planning against that is a very key thing to do. So we've come to the end of the webinar. So thank you for those who have attended, who are watching this now. There were no questions on the Q&A section, which may be my mistake in the sense that I didn't let everyone know that's available at the start, but it may be because myself and Darren have explained everything so perfectly that there's no questions. Who knows? But to end on the point, please reach out to one of ourselves for any property needs with Darren. So contact us. Our email is inquiries@fwm.gi. If you go to our website, our contact phone numbers and emails will be on there. Feel free to reach out to the company or myself directly. Darren, how can we contact you?
Yeah, via email, the website. So the website is inspiredhomesmarbella.com, or via the YouTube channel, the same, inspiredhomesmarbella.com. Wonderful.
Thank you, Darren. Well, really appreciate you joining us today. I think that was really informative. I think it'd be very useful for a lot of people. And thank you for those watching. We look forward to speaking to you soon. So thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Darren. Bye.